There is a pillar standing in the moonlight, alone in a field where nothing else remains. The stone is smooth where hands have touched it, rough where the chisel bit deep. Words curve along its surface, words carved by a man who conquered an empire and then spent the rest of his life trying to understand what that meant. How does a man who possessed everything discover he had nothing? How does an emperor who could command armies find himself powerless before a question? How does someone who made himself visible to an entire continent realize he had been invisible to himself? These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are the actual mysteries that haunted Ashoka Maurya, third emperor of India, converter of kingdoms, architect of transformation. And tonight, in the space between history and memory, we follow the thread of a single question through a single life. A question that perhaps has no answer, only echoes. The pillar stands in moonlight. The words remain. But the man who carved them, who was he really? What was he seeking? And did he ever find it? Listen, the wind is moving through empty spaces. The stone is remembering. We begin not at the beginning, but near the end, with an old man standing before his own words, reading them as though written by a stranger. The night is cool. Ashoka is 50 years old, though he feels ancient. His hands rest against stone still warm from the day's sun, and beneath his palms, he can feel the grooves where his confession was carved 20 years ago. The pillar rises into darkness above him, topped with lions that face the four directions, watching everything, seeing nothing. He has returned to this place, this particular pillar among the dozens he ordered carved across his empire, because he cannot sleep. Because the question that drove him to carve these words has never been answered. Because he is still seeking, and time is running short. In his other hand, he holds a small box, carved stone, no larger than his palm, sealed with wax that has grown brittle with age. The seal bears an imprint he has not seen in 30 years. His mother's mark, pressed into red wax the night she died. "Open it," she had whispered, her voice already distant, already leaving. When you understand what an empire truly is. He was 17. He had not understood. He does not understand now, though he has ruled an empire larger than any in India's history. Though he has conquered kingdoms and renounced violence and sent his own children to foreign lands as missionaries of peace. Though he has transformed himself from Chandashoka, the furious one, into Dhammashoka, the righteous one, the box remains sealed. Its weight has grown heavier with each passing year. He reads the words on the pillar, carved in Prakrit, so that common people might understand. The beloved of the gods, King Piyadasi, conquered the Kalingas 8 years after his coronation. 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. Afterwards, now that Kalinga was annexed, the beloved of the gods very earnestly practiced Dhamma, desired Dhamma, and taught Dhamma. On conquering Kalinga, the beloved of the gods felt remorse. For when an independent country is conquered, the slaughter, death, and deportation of the people is extremely grievous to the beloved of the gods and weighs heavily on his mind. He traces the words with his fingertips. They are smooth now, worn by 20 years of wind and rain and the occasional touch of travelers who stop to read, to wonder, to judge. The beloved of the gods. He had his scribes use that phrase, Devanampraya, to create distance between the man who ordered the conquest and the man who regretted it, as though they were different people, as though transformation were that simple. But memory is not carved in stone. Memory is water, and it finds every crack. The Daya River, dawn, the color of rust. He closes his eyes, but the image remains. The wind shifts. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird calls once, then silence returns. The kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses against your chest until you wonder if you have forgotten how to breathe. Ashoka opens his eyes. The pillar stands before him, patient and permanent. His confession, his transformation, his truth, all carved into stone that will outlast his bones, his name, his empire. But what if the question carved into stone is the wrong question? What if what he sought to understand by conquering Kalinga was never there to be understood? What if the empire itself was just another kind of invisibility, a way of mattering that mattered not at all? He looks at the sealed box in his hand. The wax is cracking at the edges. One good press of his thumb, and it would break open. 30 years of wondering ended in a moment, But he is not ready. Not yet. Perhaps he will never be ready. What is an empire, mother? He whispers to the darkness. What is it truly? The stone does not answer. The night does not answer. The box remains sealed. And so, we must go back. Back before the pillars, before the transformation, before the river that ran the color of rust. Back to a boy who did not matter, who knew he did not matter, and who built an empire trying to prove otherwise. Back to the beginning. Back to the hunger. The palace at Pataliputra is vast beyond measure. Bindusara's court spreads through chambers and corridors, like a city within a city. A maze of power where every room holds a different version of ambition. Every doorway frames a different path to significance. Young Ashoka moves through these spaces like a ghost. He is 12 years old, the third son of the emperor, and he understands already that in his father's eyes, he might as well not exist. His mother, Subhadrangi, is not of noble birth. The other queens whisper about her origins, a barber's daughter, some say, or a dancer, or worse. The details shift depending on who is speaking and what they wish to suggest. What matters is this: she is lesser. Therefore, her son is lesser. Therefore, he does not matter. His older half-brother Susima is magnificent, tall, trained in warfare, groomed for succession. He moves through the palace like he owns it, because one day, he will. The servants bow deeper to him. The generals seek his favor. The courtiers study his moods like priests reading portents. Ashoka watches from doorways. He learns to be still, to be invisible, to see without being seen. He learns that power is not just force, it is attention. It is the way a room reorganizes itself around certain people, the way conversations pause and shift when the right person enters. He does not reorganize rooms. Conversations do not pause for him. His mother understands this. She sees the hunger in him, the way he watches his father with an intensity that is almost physical. One evening, she finds him sitting in an alcove, staring at nothing, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles are white. "You are thinking of how to matter," she says. It is not a question. He looks at her. At 12, he is already learning to hide his feelings, but with her, the mask slips. "I don't," he says simply. "Matter." She sits beside him. The alcove is small, private, carved into the palace wall like a secret. Outside, the sounds of the court continue. Laughter, argument, the eternal dance of power and position. "Your father," she says carefully, "sees what he wants to see. Strength, certainty, the clear line of succession." She pauses. He does not see complexity. He does not see hunger that has no name yet. "Then how do I make him see me?" "You don't." Her voice is soft but absolute. "You make yourself undeniable." The word hangs between them. Undeniable. Not loved, not chosen. Undeniable. "How?" he asks. She does not answer immediately. Instead, she reaches into the folds of her garment and withdraws a small box. Carved stone, dark and smooth, sealed with red wax. Her seal. "I have carried this since before you were born," she says. "It contains the only truth about empires that matters. But you are not ready to know it yet." He reaches for it, but she holds it back. "You will be ready," she says, "when you understand what an empire truly is. Not what your father thinks it is. Not what the generals or the priests or the courtiers think. What it actually is, in its bones, in its heart." "What if I never understand?" She smiles, but there is sadness in it. "Then you will build one anyway, and that will be your answer." She places the box in his hands. It is smaller than he expected, but heavier. The stone is cool against his palms, the wax seal perfect and unbroken. "Do not open it until you understand," she says again. "Promise me." He promises. 3 months later, she is dead. The physicians say it was a fever. The palace whispers suggest poison. Ashoka, standing at her pyre, knows only this: the one person who saw him is gone, and he is invisible again. He keeps the box. He does not open it. He carries it with him always, this sealed question, this promised understanding. It becomes a talisman against invisibility, a reminder that somewhere, in some version of the future, he will matter enough to deserve its answer. But first, he must become undeniable. The road to Taxila is long and dusty. Ashoka is 20 years old, sent to suppress a rebellion in the northwest. It is unclear whether this is a test or an exile. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps, in his father's mind, there is no difference. Taxila is ancient, cosmopolitan, dangerous. It sits at the crossroads of trade routes, a city where Greek philosophy mingles with Indian spirituality, where merchants speak 7 languages and understand only one: profit. It is a city that has been conquered many times and has outlasted all its conquerors. The rebellion is not about ideology or freedom. It is about taxes, about administrators who took too much and gave too little back, about resentment that has been simmering for years and finally boiled over. Ashoka arrives with a small force, enough to show strength, not enough to make the situation worse. This is deliberate. Bindusara is testing him. Can he think? Can he read a situation? Can he be more than just a sword? The young prince walks through Taxila's streets without armor, without guards. This is foolish, his commanders tell him. This is suicide. But Ashoka has learned something in his years of being invisible. People do not fear what they do not see, and they do not attack what they do not fear. At least, not immediately. He listens. In the markets, in the temples, in the wine shops, where soldiers and merchants trade stories. He listens to what people say about the administrators, about the taxes, about the casual cruelties that have accumulated like dust over years. And then he acts, but not with violence. He removes the administrators. He adjusts the taxes. He makes public amends. The rebellion collapses, not because it was defeated, but because it was answered. When word reaches Pataliputra, Bindusara is not impressed exactly, but surprised. And surprise, Ashoka learns, is its own form of visibility. He thinks, the emperor says to his ministers, and there is something in his voice that might be concern or might be consideration. That one thinks. It is not love, but it is attention. Ashoka is sent to Ujjain next, to govern, to prove that Taxila was not an accident. And it is in Ujjain that he meets Devi. She is the daughter of a merchant, which means she is below his station, but not so far below that a relationship would be impossible. She is beautiful, which matters less to him than he expected. What matters is that when he speaks, she listens as though his words actually mean something. "You're the prince who thinks," she says the first time they meet, at a festival where the streets are bright with oil lamps and the air smells of jasmine and sandalwood. "Is that what they call me?" Among other things, her smile is teasing, but there is something serious beneath it. "Some call you the furious one, Chandashoka. They say you have your father's temper. Do I seem furious?" She considers this. "No, you seem hungry." The word strikes something deep. He looks at her more carefully. She is young, perhaps 17, but her eyes are older. She sees things. She sees him. "Hungry for what?" he asks. "If you knew," she says, "you wouldn't be hungry." They walk together through the festival, and for a few hours, Ashoka forgets about being undeniable. He is simply present, simply himself, simply walking beside someone who sees him without needing him to prove anything. It does not last. He marries her, not formally, not with the court's blessing, but in the way of Gandharva marriage, the way of choosing each other without ceremony. She bears him 2 children, Mahendra and Sangamita. He loves them in an abstract way, the way you love something that exists outside the main current of your life, because the main current is still flowing toward Pataliputra, toward his father, toward the throne. The sealed box sits in his chambers in Ujjain, placed beside his weapons and his maps. Sometimes, late at night, Devi asks about it. "What's inside?" "I don't know." "Why don't you open it?" "Because I promised not to until I understood what an empire truly is." "And you don't understand yet?" He looks at her in the lamplight. Her face is soft with sleep, with trust, with the kind of peace he has never felt. "No," he says, "not yet." She reaches out and touches his hand. "Maybe that's the understanding, that you don't understand. Maybe that's what your mother wanted you to know." But Ashoka cannot accept this. He is building towards something, moving towards something. The box is a seal on a future understanding, a promise that the hunger will eventually be satisfied. It must be satisfied. Otherwise, what is the point of any of it? Bindusara dies on a night when the moon is dark and the stars seem closer than usual, pressing against the earth with cold light. Ashoka is in Ujjain when word arrives. He rides hard for Pataliputra, but by the time he reaches the capital, the situation has already collapsed into chaos. Susima claims the throne. Of course he does. He is the eldest. He has been groomed for this. The generals support him. The chief ministers support him. The succession should be clear, obvious, ordained. But it is not. There are other brothers. Tradition says 99, though the actual number is lost to hyperbole and history's love of dramatic numbers. What matters is there are many, and several of them also claim the throne, and the court fractures into factions like a mirror struck by stone. What happens next is shrouded in blood and contradiction. The sources disagree. The Ashokavadana speaks of fratricide, of Ashoka killing 99 brothers to claim the throne. Other texts are silent or suggest a more limited conflict. The truth is somewhere in that silence, in that gap between records. Here is what we know. Ashoka claims the throne. He is crowned emperor 4 years after Bindusara's death. 4 years of conflict, of maneuvering, of violence that is never quite specified. 4 years that transform him from the prince who thinks into Chandashoka, the furious one. Did he kill his brothers? Some of them? All of them? Did they kill each other while he simply survived? Did he order it or merely allow it? The pillar edicts are silent on this. The stone confesses many things, but not this. What we know is that when he finally sits on the throne of Pataliputra, when the crown is finally placed on his head, when he is finally, undeniably emperor, he does not feel victorious. He feels empty. The coronation takes place at dawn. The Brahmin priests chant mantras that are older than memory, calling on gods to bless this ruler, to grant him dharma and strength and wisdom. The nobles bow. The generals bow. The common people, gathered outside the palace, bow. Ashoka sits on the throne and feels nothing. No, that's not quite right. He feels the weight. He feels the reality of attention, every eye in the vast hall focused on him, every mind reorganizing around him as the new center of power. He has become undeniable, but he does not feel satisfied. The hunger has not diminished. If anything, it has grown sharper, more insistent. That night, alone in the emperor's chambers, he holds the sealed box. He is 29 years old. He has conquered his family, his rivals, his invisibility. He rules an empire that stretches from Afghanistan to Bengal, from the Himalayas to the Deccan. Surely now. Surely he understands? But when he holds the box, ready to break the seal, he hesitates. Something in him, some instinct, some fear, tells him he is not ready, that whatever is inside will unmake something he has built, and he cannot afford to be unmade. Not yet. Not when he has finally become someone who matters. He sets the box down, places it beside his crown. Both feel equally heavy. Not yet, he whispers to his mother's memory. I'm not finished yet. Outside his window, Pataliputra spreads into darkness. Hundreds of thousands of souls, all now his responsibility, all now part of what makes him undeniable. But still the hunger remains, sharp and unsatisfied. Still he feels invisible to himself. There must be more, he thinks. There must be something else, some final proving, some ultimate conquest that will finally fill this emptiness. He looks at maps late into the night. His empire is vast, but it is not complete. There are gaps, independent kingdoms that do not bow to Mauryan authority. And one in particular catches his attention, pulls at him with an almost physical force. Kalinga. Wealthy, independent, unconquered. A thorn in the empire's eastern flank. A reminder that his authority is not absolute, that there are places where his word means nothing. Kalinga. He says the name like a prayer, like a curse. Kalinga. If he takes Kalinga, his empire will be complete. The entire subcontinent, except the very southern tip, united under one rule, under his rule. Then, surely the hunger will be satisfied. Then he will understand what an empire truly is. Then he will be ready to open the box. The preparation for war takes 3 years. Ashoka is methodical, patient in a way that surprises his generals. He studies Kalinga, its geography, its economy, its military capacity. He builds supply lines. He moves troops into position slowly, carefully, so as not to alert the Kalingan spies too soon. His advisors ask why this matters so much. Kalinga is wealthy, yes, but it is not a threat. Its ports are valuable, but trade agreements could secure access without war. Why insist on conquest? Why risk so much for territory that would surrender eventually through economic and diplomatic pressure? Ashoka cannot explain it to them because he cannot explain it to himself. Kalinga has become more than a strategic objective. It has become symbolic, mythic. It is the final proof, the ultimate conquest, the thing that will finally make him undeniable even to himself. Because it is there, he tells his generals, because it remains unconquered, because an empire is not complete with gaps in it. They accept this. Emperors do not need to justify their desires. That is what it means to be emperor. His personal life continues in parallel. He marries Asandamitra, a princess of appropriate noble lineage, in a ceremony the court approves of. She is beautiful, educated, proper. The marriage is political, respectful, distant. They share chambers sometimes, conversation rarely. She gives him children, princes and princesses who will secure the succession. Devi and her children remain in Ujjain. He sends them money, messages, occasional visits. He tells himself this is sufficient, that love and empire are separate things, operating in separate spheres. But late at night, when he is alone, he thinks of how Devi saw his hunger and did not judge it. He thinks of how she asked simple questions that suggested complex answers. He thinks of how, with her, he sometimes forgot to be undeniable and simply was. But he cannot afford to simply be. Not yet. Not until the empire is complete. The sealed box sits in his private chambers. Sometimes, passing it, he touches the wax seal, feels it growing more brittle with time, imagines what might be inside. A letter, certainly. His mother's final words. But what could she say that would constitute understanding? What truth about empires could fit in such a small space? Perhaps it is empty, he thinks sometimes. Perhaps that is the lesson, that empires are empty things, shells containing nothing. But he rejects this thought immediately. His empire is real, his power is real. The attention, the reorganization of rooms, the way the world bends around his will, all real. The box is simply waiting. When Kalinga falls, when the empire is complete, he will open it, and he will understand. The army gathers like a storm preparing to break. 150,000 soldiers, infantry, cavalry, elephants. The largest force Ashoka has ever assembled. The Kalingans have perhaps 60,000 defenders. The outcome is not in doubt. The night before the invasion, Ashoka walks through the camp alone. His guards follow at a distance, giving him the illusion of solitude. Fires burn across the plain like fallen stars, and the breath of men and animals rises into the cold air as visible fog. He carries the box with him. He has brought it this far, and now, standing on the edge of what will be his final conquest, he feels its weight more acutely than ever. After this, he says to it, to his mother's memory, to himself. After this, I will understand. After this, I will be ready. The box is silent, the wax seal intact. He almost opens it then. His thumb is pressed to the seal, ready to break it. But something stops him. Some fear, some instinct that once opened, it cannot be closed again. That whatever understanding is inside might change him in ways he is not prepared for. After Kalinga, he whispers, when I am truly complete. He returns to his tent, sleeps poorly, dreams of his mother's face, though the details blur and shift. He cannot quite remember what she looked like, only that she saw him, only that she mattered. Dawn comes cold and clear. The army begins to move. The battle for Kalinga lasts 3 months. The Kalingans fight with desperation, with courage, with the ferocity of people defending their homes against annihilation. They fight in the cities, in the forests, in the hills. They fight until there is no one left to fight. Ashoka does not lead from the front. He is emperor now, too valuable to risk in direct combat. He commands from a hill overlooking the battlefield, watching the movements of armies like a game of chess played with human pieces. He does not see the individual deaths. He sees formations, strategies, the slow, inevitable progress of superior numbers and resources. He sees victory unfolding exactly as planned. The Kalingans surrender after their capital falls. The terms are not generous. Ashoka is here to conquer, not to compromise. Kalinga will be absorbed into the Mauryan Empire. Its wealth will flow to Pataliputra. Its people will bow to him. He is victorious. He is undeniable. The empire is complete. And yet, standing in his tent the night after the final surrender, Ashoka feels nothing. No satisfaction. No completion. Just emptiness and a growing unease. It's finished, his general tells him. Kalinga is yours. Yes, Ashoka says. But the word feels hollow. The next morning, he rides out to survey his conquest. This is customary, the victor walking through the fallen city, accepting the submission of the defeated, making his presence real and undeniable. But something goes wrong. Or perhaps something goes right, in the way that breaking is sometimes the only path to healing. He rides through the aftermath at dawn. The battle is over. The conquest is complete. Now there is only the accounting. The Daya River runs through the heart of Kalinga's territory. Ashoka has seen it on maps 100 times. A simple blue line, a geographical feature. But maps do not show what rivers look like after 3 months of war. The water should be clear, reflecting the pale morning sky. Instead, it is rust-colored, thick with what rivers should never carry. The bodies have been cleared from the banks. His soldiers have worked through the night, following protocol, but the water remembers. 100,000 dead, 150,000 deported. These are the numbers his scribes will record. But numbers are abstract. Numbers are strategy and statistics. Numbers are something you can say without feeling. Ashoka dismounts. His guards try to stop him, but he waves them back. He walks to the river's edge alone. The water moves slowly, heavy with what it carries. The color is already fading, rust to red to something approaching clear again. By evening it will look almost normal. By tomorrow you would not know what happened here, but Ashoka will know. He sees a piece of cloth caught on a root, a child's garment, bright yellow, torn and stained. Nearby, a broken pot, the kind used for carrying water, an ordinary thing, shattered. Further down the bank, a sandal. Just one, small. He stands there as the sun rises, watching the river clean itself, watching evidence of what he ordered fade into morning light, and something in him, something he has been building carefully for years, stone upon stone, begins to crack. A sound reaches him from the ruined city behind. Not screaming. The screaming has stopped. This is worse. This is crying. The particular hopeless sound of someone who has lost everything and does not know what to do with the emptiness that remains. He should not investigate. He is emperor. This is beneath his attention. The conquest is complete. The aftermath is administrative detail, but he walks toward the sound anyway. He finds her in what was once a marketplace. A woman, maybe 30 years old, maybe 50. Grief ages people in ways time cannot. She sits beside a body. She is not touching it, just sitting, making that sound. Ashoka stops 20 feet away. His guards are nervous, hands on their weapons, scanning for threats. But there is no threat here, just grief so absolute it has become a physical presence. Who was he? Ashoka asks. The woman does not look up, does not acknowledge that an emperor has spoken to her. The sound continues, rhythmic, endless. One of his guards moves forward. Majesty. I asked who he was. The guard hesitates, then speaks to the woman in the Kalingan dialect. She does not respond. He asks again. Nothing. Finally she speaks, not to answer, but because words come from the same place as grief, and the grief is overflowing. He wanted to learn carpentry, she says in broken Prakrit. He was good with his hands. He was going to make a table. We didn't have a table. He said when he learned, the first thing he would make. She stops. The sound returns, that hopeless crying. Ashoka stands there. The sun is fully up now. The day is beautiful. Clear sky, warm light, the kind of morning that suggests possibility and hope. An obscene morning for this moment. I'm sorry, he says. The words are meaningless. Worse than meaningless, an emperor's apology for a carpenter's death, for a table that will never be built, for a marketplace that will never again echo with the ordinary sound of commerce and conversation and life. The woman does not respond. Perhaps she does not hear. Perhaps she hears and does not care. What difference does an emperor's sorrow make to her? Can it resurrect the dead? Can it undo the orders that brought 150,000 soldiers to this place? Ashoka returns to his horse. Mounts. Continues his survey of the conquered territory. But something has broken. Some carefully maintained fiction, some structure of understanding that allowed him to order death without feeling it, to pursue power without counting the cost. He rides through the ruined city. Everywhere, the same scene repeats with slight variations. Grief. Loss. The aftermath of that numbers do not capture. 100,000 dead, but each one is a person. Each one is a carpenter who wanted to make a table. Each one is a child with a yellow garment. Each one is someone's entire world, ended. By the time he returns to his camp, Ashoka's hands are shaking. He dismisses his guards, enters his tent, and stands there in the dim light, trying to breathe. What has he done? No, that's the wrong question. He knows what he has done. He ordered it. He planned it. He executed it perfectly. What breaks him is not ignorance, but understanding. He has conquered Kalinga. He has completed his empire. He has become undeniable. And he has never felt more invisible in his life. Because who is he now? Who is this person who orders death by the 100,000 in pursuit of what? Visibility? Completion? The satisfaction of a hunger that only grows sharper with each attempt to feed it? He sits on his cot. His hands are still shaking. He feels lightheaded, disconnected, as though he has stepped outside himself and is watching from a distance as someone who looks like him falls apart. The sealed box sits among his belongings. He has carried it with him, as always. He reaches for it. The wax seal is brittle now, cracks running through it like tiny rivers. One touch, and it would break. "I understand," he whispers. "Mother, I understand." But even as he says it, he is not sure what he understands, only that something fundamental has shifted, that he cannot go back to being the person who rode into Kalinga 3 months ago, that whatever is in this box, he needs it now more than he has ever needed anything. His thumb presses against the seal. It breaks. Inside the box is dust, or ash, something fine and gray, ancient and dry, and beneath it, folded small, a scrap of paper with words in his mother's hand. The ink has faded, but is still legible. He lifts the paper carefully. The ash, or dust, shifts, falls through his fingers, leaves gray smudges on his hands. He reads, "My son, my furious one, my hungry one. If you are reading this, you have built an empire. You have made yourself undeniable. You have proven to your father, to the court, to the world, that you matter. But what have you proven to yourself? This dust is what remains of empires. Your grandfather's empire, your father's empire, yours. All empires end in dust. All power reduces to silence. All monuments crumble. What remains is what you do with the time you have, who you choose to be with the power you hold. Whether you build walls or bridges, whether you multiply suffering or ease it. An empire is not land or armies or wealth. An empire is every moment you choose what to do with power, every life you touch, every order you give that ripples outward into the world. You wanted to matter, my son. You already mattered. You mattered to me. You mattered in yourself. But you could not see it because you were looking in the wrong direction. Outward, toward your father's attention, toward the court's recognition, toward history's judgment. Look inward. That is where empires are built or destroyed. That is where you will find what you are seeking, if you are brave enough to stop conquering long enough to look. The dust in this box is from my mother's bones. When she died, I kept a handful of her ashes to remember that everything ends, and therefore everything matters while it lasts. Choose, my son. Choose what you will build with your ending. Choose what empire you will leave behind. I love you. I see you. You matter. You have always mattered. Ashoka sits in the dim tent with the letter in his hands and dust on his fingers and his entire understanding of himself, crumbling like the wax seal that held secrets for 30 years. She knew. His mother knew that he would chase power, that he would build an empire to prove his existence, that he would mistake visibility for significance. And she left him this. Not an answer, but a question. Not a destination, but a choice. What empire will you build now? He looks at the dust on his hands, his grandmother's bones, his mother's love, the physical evidence that everything ends, and therefore everything matters. The sounds of the camp continue outside, soldiers preparing for the journey back to Pataliputra, celebrating their victory, counting the wealth that will flow from this conquest. They have won. They are victorious. They do not yet know that their emperor is fragmenting, that the man who ordered this conquest is being unmade by its success. Ashoka puts the letter down carefully, looks at the sealed box, now open, its secret released into the world. 30 years he carried this question. 30 years it waited, and now he knows. He was never seeking completion. He was seeking permission to stop seeking, permission to simply be, permission to matter without conquest, without proof, without the endless hunger that drove him from invisibility to empire. But he does not know how to stop. He does not know who he is without the hunger. He has spent his entire life becoming undeniable. What does he become now? The answer arrives not as words but as memory. The woman by the river. The hopeless sound of grief. The carpenter who wanted to make a table. He caused that. He personally, with his orders and his ambition and his need to complete an empire that was never incomplete. Only he was incomplete, and he mistook his own fragmentation for the empire's gaps. Can it be undone? No. The dead remain dead. The grief remains. 100,000 deaths, 150,000 deportations. These are real, permanent, irreversible. But what comes next? That is still unwritten. That is still a choice. Ashoka stands, walks to the entrance of his tent. Outside, the dawn is giving way to full morning. His empire spreads in all directions, complete at last. And he understands, with a clarity that feels like drowning, that completion was never the goal. It was never even possible. He returns to Pataliputra a different man, though the difference is not yet visible. The court celebrates his victory. The generals praise his strategy. The treasury swells with Kalingan wealth. The maps are redrawn to show the empire's new borders. Nearly the entire subcontinent, from sea to sea, united under Mauryan rule. Ashoka goes through the motions, accepts congratulations, distributes rewards, issues orders for the administration of the new territory. He is perfect in his role, and no one notices the emptiness behind his eyes, except perhaps Asandamitra, who watches him at a state banquet and sees something she has not seen before. Uncertainty. Her husband, the emperor, the conqueror of Kalinga, looks lost. She approaches him later, when the guests have departed and the palace is settling into night. "You are troubled," she says. It is not a question. "I am victorious," he responds. The words taste like ash. Those are not contradictory things. He looks at her, really looks at her, perhaps for the first time in their years of political marriage. She is intelligent, perceptive, patient. She has never demanded his attention, never competed with his ambitions. She has simply been there, witnessing, understanding more than he gave her credit for. "What is victory?" he asks her. "What does it mean to win?" "That depends," she says carefully, "on what you were fighting for." "I was fighting for," he stops. "For what? Completion? Visibility? His father's attention, though his father is years dead." "I don't know," he admits. She is silent for a long moment. Then, perhaps that is the beginning of knowing. That night, alone in his chambers, Ashoka locks the door and does something he has not done since childhood. He weeps. Not the angry tears of frustration, but the deep, shaking sobs of someone confronting what they have become. 100,000 dead. For what? For maps that will be redrawn by future empires? For wealth that will be spent or stolen or scattered? For an empire that will, like all empires, eventually crumble into dust? He thinks of his mother's letter. Choose what you will build with your ending. He is 40 years old. He may have 20 years left, perhaps 30 if the gods are kind. What will he do with that time? Continue as he has been, conquering, accumulating, feeding a hunger that only grows sharper with each meal? Or choose something else? Something he cannot yet name, but can feel pulling at him like gravity, like inevitability. In the morning, he summons his chief ministers. They arrive expecting routine administrative business. Instead, Ashoka says, "I wish to meet with Buddhist monks." The ministers exchange glances. Buddhism is known in the empire, tolerated, but not particularly influential. It is a philosophy for ascetics and contemplatives, not emperors. "Majesty," one ventures carefully, "if you seek spiritual guidance, we have excellent Brahmin priests." "I said Buddhist monks." His voice is quiet but absolute. They bow. They will arrange it. The monk who comes is named Upagupta. He is old, thin, with eyes that seem to see through surfaces to what lies beneath. He sits in the palace's guest quarters as though they are no different from a forest floor, comfortable, present, unimpressed. Ashoka sits across from him and does not know how to begin. How do you confess to a monk that you have built an empire on corpses? How do you ask if transformation is possible when you have done irreversible harm? Upagupta speaks first. You are suffering. It is such a simple observation, such an obvious truth, that Ashoka almost laughs. Yes, you have conquered a kingdom and lost yourself. Yes. And now you wonder if the self you lost is worth finding again. Ashoka stares at him. How do you... It is an old story, Upagupta says gently. Power, suffering. The search for meaning in what cannot give meaning. You are not the first to walk this path. You will not be the last. Can I... Ashoka's voice breaks. He steadies it. Can I change? After what I've done? Can someone like me become someone different? You are already different, Upagupta says. The man who conquered Kalinga would not ask that question. The man you are now is asking it. Change has already begun. But the dead are dead. You cannot undo what has been done, but you can choose what you do next. You can choose what you build with the power you still hold. You can choose to ease suffering instead of creating it. How? The word comes out desperate, raw. How do I do that? By seeing, Upagupta says. By truly seeing the suffering of others and recognizing it as your own. By understanding that there is no separation between your pain and theirs. By choosing in each moment to act from that understanding. They talk for hours. Upagupta explains the Buddha's teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the concepts of dukkha and nirvana, and the middle way. But what strikes Ashoka most is simpler than doctrine. It is this. Suffering is real. It is universal. It can be addressed. And the choice to address it, to ease it, to work against it, is available in every moment, to every person, regardless of what they have done in the past. Even to emperors who have built their power on corpses. I want to study, Ashoka says. I want to understand. Then study, Upagupta says. But understanding without action is just another form of suffering. If you truly wish to change, you must act. How? Start with your own empire. Look at the suffering your administration creates. The unjust taxes, the cruel punishments, the arbitrary use of power. Change that. Then look beyond your borders. Send missions of peace instead of conquest. Build hospitals, not fortresses. Plant trees instead of reaping wealth. The court will resist. The generals? Yes, Upagupta says. Change is always resisted, but you are emperor. You have power. The question is, what will you do with it? What empire will you build now? His mother's question, echoing. Ashoka bows to Upagupta. The gesture shocks the servants who witness it, an emperor bowing to a monk. But Ashoka does not care. In this moment, he is not emperor. He is a student. He is someone learning, finally, to see. The transformation does not happen all at once. It is not dramatic. It is the slow, grinding work of choosing differently, moment by moment, day by day. First, he issues edicts reforming the justice system. Cruel punishments are abolished. Prisoners are treated with dignity. The death penalty is nearly eliminated except for the most extreme cases. And even then, prisoners are given days to prepare, to reconcile, to die with some measure of peace. The court is confused. The generals are concerned. Some whisper that the emperor has gone soft, that Kalinga broke him, that he is unfit to rule, but Ashoka persists. He establishes hospitals, not just for humans, but for animals. He plants trees along roads to provide shade for travelers. He digs wells in areas suffering from drought. He creates rest houses for merchants and pilgrims. These are small things, practical things, but they are also revolutionary. They suggest that the purpose of power is not to accumulate more power, but to ease the suffering of those who have none. He begins to study Buddhist texts seriously, not as a hobby or a phase, but with the intensity he once brought to military strategy. He meditates. He discusses philosophy with monks. He questions, debates, seeks understanding, and slowly, carefully, he begins to articulate a new vision. Not Buddhism exactly, but something he calls Dhamma, a universal ethic of compassion, nonviolence, respect for all living beings. He draws from Buddhism, from Jainism, from Hinduism, from the various philosophical traditions that flourish in his diverse empire. Dhamma becomes his new conquest, but this conquest does not require armies. It requires words, carved into stone, placed across the empire so that common people can read them and understand that even an emperor, especially an emperor, must answer to something higher than power. The first major inscription is Edict III, his confession about Kalinga. He dictates it to his scribes with shaking hands. The beloved of the gods, King Piyadasi, conquered the Kalingas 8 years after his coronation. 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. Afterwards, now that Kalinga was annexed, the beloved of the gods very earnestly practiced Dhamma, desired Dhamma, and taught Dhamma. On conquering Kalinga, the beloved of the gods felt remorse, for when an independent country is conquered, the slaughter, death, and deportation of the people is extremely grievous to the beloved of the gods and weighs heavily on his mind. When the scribes read it back to him, one says carefully, "Majesty, this admits fault. This shows weakness." "No," Ashoka says, "this shows truth. Let the stones speak truth. Let them witness what I have done and what I choose now." The edict is carved and erected at multiple sites across the empire. People gather to read it. They are shocked. Emperors do not confess. Emperors do not admit remorse. Emperors do not suggest that conquest is grievous, but Ashoka does. And in doing so, he creates something unprecedented, an empire that questions its own violence, a power structure that admits its flaws, a king who places himself under the judgment of ethical principles rather than above them. It does not make him popular with everyone. The military establishment is particularly resistant. They see Dhamma as a rejection of their values, their purpose, their identity as warriors. One general confronts him directly. "Majesty, you have made us great through conquest. Now you say conquest is wrong. What are we to be now? What purpose do we serve?" Ashoka considers this seriously. "You serve the same purpose as always. You protect. But now you protect not through violence, but through its absence. You protect the empire by making conquest unnecessary, by making peace more profitable than war, by showing that strength can be gentle. That is not the warrior's way." "No," Ashoka agrees. "It is harder than the warrior's way. It requires more courage, not less. It requires you to transform, as I am transforming. Not all of them can make this transformation. Some resign, some retire, some remain but grumble and resist. But slowly the empire's character begins to shift. Not completely, not perfectly, but perceptibly. 8 years after Kalinga, Ashoka takes the formal step of converting to Buddhism. The ceremony is private, intimate, just him, Upagupta, and a few close disciples. He takes the refuges, commits to the precepts, accepts the label that will follow him through history, Dhammashoka, the righteous one. But even as he takes this step, he knows it is not enough. Transformation is not a single choice, but an endless series of choices, and the question remains, has he changed truly? Or has he simply replaced one form of empire building with another, conquering through ethics instead of armies, but still fundamentally driven by the same hunger to matter, to be undeniable? He does not know. Perhaps he will never know. Perhaps that uncertainty is part of the transformation. Learning to act without certainty, to choose compassion even when you cannot be sure it makes a difference, to build toward peace even when you cannot guarantee it will last. Asandamitra watches this transformation with quiet support. She never converts formally, but she helps fund hospitals, supports the welfare programs, listens when he needs to articulate his doubts. "Do you think I'm a hypocrite?" he asks her one night, "preaching nonviolence while ruling an empire built on violence? Advocating compassion while sitting on a throne I won through fratricide? I think you are human," she says. "I think you made terrible choices and are trying to make better ones. I think the trying matters, even if you never arrive at perfection." But is it enough? Can it ever be enough? "I don't know," she admits. But the question itself, the fact that you ask it, that is already something. Something the old Ashoka would never have considered. He thinks of Devi, whom he has not seen in years. He sends her a letter, asking forgiveness for his absence, for prioritizing empire over family, for being present in body, but absent in spirit during the few years they had together. She writes back, "You cannot undo the past, but you can honor it by changing the future. Your children, our children, are doing well. Mahendra and Sangamita have expressed interest in the Dhamma. If you would send teachers, they would welcome them." This opens a new possibility. If his own children can be transformed by these teachings, perhaps they can carry them beyond the empire. Perhaps the Dhamma can spread not through conquest, but through voluntary adoption, through the simple power of ideas that ease suffering. He begins to plan missions, not military expeditions, but peace delegations. Monks and nuns sent to neighboring kingdoms with messages of nonviolence, with gifts instead of threats, with invitations to dialogue rather than demands for submission. His advisors are skeptical. "Majesty, these kingdoms will see this as weakness. They will not respect peace. They will see an opportunity for invasion. Then we will defend ourselves," Ashoka says. "But we will not initiate violence. We will show that strength and peace are not opposites." The missions are sent to the Greek kingdoms in the northwest, where Ashoka's own grandfather had fought Alexander's successors, to the Chola and Pandya kingdoms in the south, to Ceylon, where the king is reportedly interested in Buddhist teachings, and remarkably, impossibly, many of these missions succeed, not militarily. They bring no territory, no tribute, no submission. But they plant seeds, they create connections. They suggest that empires can relate to each other in ways other than conquest and submission. The mission to Ceylon is particularly significant. The king, Devanampi Atisa, invites Ashoka to send teachers, and Ashoka makes a choice that shocks the court. He sends his own children. Mahendra and Sangamita, now adults, trained in the Dhamma, willing to leave the empire and become missionaries. The day they depart, Devi comes to Pataliputra for the first time in 20 years. She is older, grayer, but her eyes still see through surfaces. She and Ashoka stand together watching their children prepare for the journey. "You are sending them away," she says, "as you sent yourself away from us." Yes, he will not deny it. "But I am sending them towards something, not away from something. That is different." Is it? He does not know how to answer. Perhaps it is the same. Perhaps he is still driven by the same hunger, now dressed in robes of righteousness. Perhaps his transformation is just another kind of empire building. Or perhaps it is genuinely different. Perhaps choosing to spread peace instead of violence, even if the motivation is complex, even if the ego is still involved, even if he is still seeking to be undeniable. Perhaps the choice itself matters more than the purity of the motivation. "I don't know if I have truly changed," he admits to Devi. "I don't know if what I am doing is genuine transformation or just another form of conquest. But I know I cannot go back to being who I was. I know I cannot stop trying to be better than I was." She looks at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she takes his hand. "That is enough," she says. "That is more than enough." Their children depart. They carry with them not armies or threats, but ideas, questions, invitations to see suffering and choose to ease it. Ashoka watches them go and feels something he has not felt since he was 17, standing at his mother's pyre: connection. Not ownership or control or the satisfaction of hunger, but simple connection to other beings, other lives, other choices rippling outward into an unknowable future. It is not completion, it is not certainty, but it is something. The pillar edicts become Ashoka's primary legacy. He orders dozens of them carved, tall stone columns topped with animal capitals, inscribed with his messages about Dhamma. They are placed at crossroads, at holy sites, at the edges of the empire. Some are 30 feet tall, weighing many tons, carved from single stones and transported hundreds of miles. Each pillar is a confession and an invitation. A confession? I was wrong. I caused suffering. I regret it. An invitation. Choose differently. Live with compassion. Ease suffering where you find it. The language is simple, direct, meant for common people rather than scholars. This too is revolutionary. Emperors typically communicate through intermediaries, through priests and officials. But Ashoka speaks directly to his subjects. as though they matter individually, as though their choices matter as much as his. Some edicts are gentle, encouraging. One should obey one's mother and father. One should respect the aged. One should speak the truth. These are the virtues of Dhamma. Others are more specific, addressing administrative practices. No animal shall be slaughtered for sacrifice. Trees shall not be burned without purpose. Officers shall conduct tours to ensure the people are being treated fairly and without cruelty. And always, woven through the edicts, the acknowledgement of Kalinga, the reminder that even an emperor can change. That transformation is possible. That remorse is not weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. The pillars go up across the empire, in the north, in the east, in the south, each one a stone witness to a transformed emperor, a permanent record carved into material that will outlast empires. But even as he creates these monuments, Ashoka wonders, am I building again? Am I trying to make myself undeniable through stone instead of conquest? Is this another form of the same hunger? He asks Upagupta this during one of their regular meetings. The old monk smiles. Of course you are. You are human. The ego does not disappear. It transforms. The question is not whether you have ego, but what your ego serves. Does it serve only itself? Or does it serve something larger? I don't know. Then keep asking. That uncertainty is healthy. It keeps you honest. Ashoka is 50 now. He has ruled for 25 years. The empire is vast, relatively peaceful, administered with more compassion than any empire before it. His name is known from the Mediterranean to Southeast Asia. He has become undeniable, but now the way he is undeniable has changed. Now he is undeniable not through conquest, but through transformation. Not through the imposition of will, but through the invitation to choose differently. Is that better? Is that enough? He still does not know. The final years bring complications. Empires are easier to build than to maintain. The infrastructure of peace requires constant attention, constant resources, constant commitment, and not everyone shares Ashoka's vision. His sons from Asandimitra begin to resist his policies. They see the Dhamma emphasis as impractical, as weakening the empire's military edge, as inviting future conquest by neighbors who do not share these values. Father, his eldest says during a tense council meeting, you have created institutions of peace in a world that does not know peace. What happens when you die? When someone less committed to Dhamma takes the throne? Will these institutions survive? It is a good question. A question Ashoka has asked himself many times. I don't know, he admits. Perhaps they will survive. Perhaps they will crumble, but I had to try. I had to choose to build something different than what I inherited. Even if it collapses? Especially if it collapses. The trying is the point. The choosing is the point. But doubt creeps in. He is old now, tired. The energy that drove him through conquest and through transformation is waning. He feels his mortality approaching. Not immediately, but certainly. The sealed box his mother gave him is long since opened, its message absorbed. But new questions have replaced the old ones. What will remain after he is gone? Will the Dhamma survive? Will his transformation mean anything in the long sweep of history? Or will he be remembered only as a conqueror who grew soft, an emperor who weakened his own empire through misguided compassion? He returns to Kalinga one last time. It is a private journey, not an official tour. He wants to see it again with old eyes, to understand what he has spent 30 years trying to make right. The region has recovered. New buildings, new markets, new life. The wounds of conquest are hidden beneath normal life, the way all wounds eventually become invisible, at least to those who did not experience them. But Ashoka sees them, or feels them. The ghosts are there, even if no one else acknowledges them. He finds the Daya River. It runs clear now, of course. Beautiful even, reflecting the afternoon sun. No trace of rust, of blood, of what happened here 3 decades ago. He stands on the bank where he once stood and broke, and he wonders, did it matter? His transformation, his Dhamma, his pillars and edicts and missions of peace, did any of it balance the scales? Did any of it undo what he did here? No, of course not. The dead remain dead. The suffering that rippled out from his conquest, the families destroyed, the children orphaned, the carpenter who never built his table, none of that is undone. But perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the point is not to undo, but to choose what comes next. To let the weight of what cannot be undone inform every subsequent choice. To carry the grief and the remorse not as punishment, but as remembering, as honoring, as refusing to forget the cost of what was done. An old woman approaches him. She does not know who he is. Just an old man standing by the river, lost in thought. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she says in the Kalingan dialect. He understands her, though he does not speak the language fluently. "Yes," he says, "beautiful." "Were you here during the war?" He hesitates, then, "Yes, I was here." "Terrible times," she says, shaking her head. "So many dead. My father died in the fighting. I was just a child." "I'm sorry," he says. The same inadequate words he spoke 30 years ago to a different woman. She shrugs. "It was long ago. The river keeps flowing. Life keeps going. What else can we do?" "Yes," he says quietly. "What else can we do?" She continues on her way. Ashoka remains by the river as the sun sets, watching the light fade from the water, watching beauty and memory coexist in the same space. He returns to Pataliputra, knowing it will likely be his last long journey. He is old, his body is failing, and the future is rushing toward him whether he is ready or not. He spends his final years consolidating, writing, ensuring that the principles of Dhamma are recorded not just in stone, but in administrative practices, in legal codes, in the training of the next generation of officials. He establishes universities, libraries, centers of learning. He funds translations of texts, supports scholars from different traditions, creates spaces for dialogue between philosophies. It is work that will outlast him, or it might all crumble when he dies. He cannot know. Upagupta visits him near the end. The monk is ancient now, thin as paper, but still present, still seeing. "Did I do enough?" Ashoka asks him. It is a question he has asked many times in many ways, but never quite like this. Never with such finality. "Enough for what?" Upagupta responds. "For Kalinga, for the deaths, for the suffering I caused." "No," Upagupta says simply. "You can never do enough. 100,000 deaths cannot be balanced by 10,000 acts of compassion. The scales do not work that way." Ashoka feels something crumble inside him. He had known this, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly at the end of his life is devastating. But Upagupta is not finished. "However," the old monk continues, "that is not the point. The point is not to balance scales, but to choose, in each moment, to ease suffering rather than create it. You cannot undo the past, but you change the trajectory of the future. That matters. That is everything. Will it last? After I die? Some of it will. Some will crumble. The pillars will stand. Stone endures. The ideas will spread and transform and merge with other ideas. The institutions will adapt or collapse. History will remember you in ways you cannot control. Then what was the point? The point, Upagupta says gently, was the choosing, in each moment. To see suffering and try to ease it. To recognize your own violence and choose differently. To remain uncertain. To keep questioning. To never assume you have arrived at the destination. That sounds exhausting, Upagupta laughs, a dry, papery sound. Yes, that is human life. Exhausting and beautiful and brief and significant. You used your brief time to choose compassion over violence, questions over certainty, transformation over stagnation. That is enough. That is more than enough. Ashoka dies in his sleep at age 58. He is not remembered as a saint. How could he be? With Kalinga's ghosts still whispering. But he is remembered as transformed, as someone who looked at what he had done and chose to do something different. The empire he built does not last. Within 50 years of his death, the Mauryan dynasty crumbles. The political structure fragments. The administrative innovations decay. The peaceful foreign policy is abandoned for more traditional approaches to power, but the pillars remain. They stand across the Indian subcontinent, stone witnesses to a man who changed and then spent the rest of his life trying to understand what that change meant. Time wears at them. Some break. Some are moved or repurposed. But enough remain, enough are preserved, enough carry his words forward into the future. 2,300 years later, they still stand, still speak, still ask the same questions Ashoka asked. What is power for? How should it be used? Can someone who has done terrible things choose to do better things? Does transformation matter even if it comes too late? Even if it is imperfect? Even if it never balances the scales? The Daya River still flows, clear and beautiful, holding no visible trace of that morning when it ran the color of rust. But the water remembers, even if people forget. The earth remembers, even if history moves on. And somewhere in the space between memory and forgetting, Ashoka still stands by the river, still breaks open the sealed box, still reads his mother's words. Choose what you will build with your ending. He chose. He built pillars instead of fortresses. He carved confessions instead of proclamations. He sent missionaries instead of armies. He questioned instead of conquering. Was it enough? The question echoes through centuries. The pillars offer no answer, only the testimony of a man who tried, who saw the cost of his ambition and could not unsee it, who broke and then tried to build something new from the fragments. There is a pillar standing in the moonlight, alone in a field where nothing else remains. The stone is smooth where hands have touched it, rough where the chisel bit deep. Words curve along its surface, words carved by a man who conquered an empire and then spent the rest of his life trying to understand what that meant. We return to where we began, the questions that have no answers, only echoes. How does a man who possessed everything discover he had nothing? Perhaps by standing in a field at dawn, watching a river remember violence, and recognizing that all his conquests had conquered nothing, least of all himself. How does an emperor who could command armies find himself powerless before a question? Perhaps by opening a sealed box and finding only dust, the physical proof that empires end, that power fades, that what matters cannot be commanded or conquered. How does someone who made himself visible to an entire continent realize he had been invisible to himself? Perhaps by transforming and then questioning the transformation, by choosing differently and then wondering if the choosing came too late, by building monuments to change and knowing they might crumble like everything else. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are the actual mysteries that haunted Ashoka Maurya, and they haunt us still, because they are not historical questions. They are human questions. What do we do with power when we have it? How do we live with what we have done? Can we change truly? Does trying to change matter even if we never fully succeed? Even if we carry the weight of our past actions forever? Even if the scales never balance? Ashoka did not answer these questions. He lived them. He carved them into stone so future generations would have to face them too. He transformed himself from Chandashoka to Dhammashoka, from the furious one to the righteous one. But he remained human throughout, uncertain and seeking and never quite arriving. The sealed box opened, the dust scattered, the empire built and crumbled, but the questions remain, carved into stone that outlasts dynasties and dogmas and declarations of certainty. And perhaps that is the answer. Not that we can conquer our shadows or undo our violence or become perfect beings, but that we can choose in each moment to see suffering and try to ease it, to recognize our own capacity for harm and choose differently, to remain uncertain rather than certain, questioning rather than proclaiming, seeking rather than claiming to have found. The pillar stands in the moonlight. The words remain. The man who carved them is 2,000 years gone, his bones long since returned to dust like his mother's, like his grandmother's, like the bones of everyone who lived and died in his empire. But the question he carved, the eternal, unanswerable, essential question, still whispers in the wind. What will you build with your power? What will you do with your brief time? How will you choose to use your ending? There is no right answer. There is only choosing. There is only the moment-by-moment decision to ease suffering or create it, to question or to conquer, to transform or to stagnate. Ashoka chose transformation. He built pillars that still stand. He carved confessions that still speak. He sent ideas rippling across Asia that merged and morphed and influenced millions. He remained uncertain until the end, questioning whether his transformation mattered, whether it was genuine, whether it was enough. But he chose. He kept choosing. He never stopped choosing, even when the outcome was uncertain, even when the scales did not balance, even when the dead remained dead and the suffering could not be undone. And somewhere in the eternal present, in the space where time folds and memory becomes living, Ashoka still stands by the Daya River, still breaks open the sealed box, still reads words that offer no comfort, only choice, still chooses. Not toward completion. Completion was always an illusion. Not toward certainty. Certainty is the province of those who refuse to see. But towards something harder and more essential. The willingness to remain uncertain while still acting, to carry regret while still choosing compassion, to accept that empires crumble while still building something worth crumbling. The wind moves through empty spaces. The stone remembers. The water flows clear, but beneath its surface, memory persists. And perhaps the empire Ashoka truly conquered was not Kalinga or Mauryan territory, or the vast subcontinent stretching from sea to sea. Perhaps the empire he truly conquered was the one inside himself. The hunger that drove him, the invisibility that haunted him, the certainty that blinded him. Perhaps the empire was never geographic at all. Perhaps it was always the territory of the human heart, that unmappable country where we wage our truest wars and build our most enduring monuments. Perhaps what he was seeking was never meant to be found in conquest or renunciation, in transformation or constancy, in certainty or uncertainty, but in the space between where a human being stands naked before the simple, terrible choice of what to do with power when they possess it. And somewhere, in that space between memory and stone, between history and myth, between the man he was and the man he tried to become, Ashoka keeps carving. Not proclamations, not conquests, not answers, questions, into the only stone that truly matters, the human heart.